For March, let's talk interactive fiction and how reading and writing it can make us better linear fiction writers. First, choose your own path books. You're probably most familiar with Choose Your Own Adventure, but Choose Your Own Adventure is a specific brand name. Other companies and other writers can't technically use that language, so they come up with other things. How do Choose Your Own Path books work? You'll be reading along, and you'll come across little passages like this that will tell you to turn to a certain page based on the choice you want to make. So you'll then turn to that page, invariably read a little bit, hate that choice, and go back and make the other one. That's how I always did it. And this is a diagram of what the choice structure looks like in this particular book. So how does reading or even writing a Choose Your Own Path book help you when you're writing linear fiction? What skills do you pick up? Choose Your Own Path is a sort of adventure in cause and effect for your plot. Every branching point is a sort of quantum moment describing multiple different directions a plot could go based on the choice of our main character, the reader. It becomes a sort of open-ended thought experiment in how main character choice drives the story forward. Also, as someone who's written a lot of branching narrative, you have to plan this shit, or it goes off the rails really, really quickly. So if you're strictly a pantser and you want to sort of force yourself into outlining mode for the expansion of your tool set, Choose Your Own Path and interactive fiction like this is an absolutely fabulous way to make yourself try it because it's hard to do well otherwise. Look for physical Choose Your Own Path or Select Your Own Adventure books. You can also find them online as Twine games or hyperlink games. You can just look for Twine or hyperlink and they'll be there. I highly recommend giving them a shot, at least playing. So last week I talked Choose Your Own Path book or Choose Your Own Adventure books, and they are technically a form of game book. If you were to go Google game book though, you might get something a little bit different. That's because there's a subtype of game book that takes that Choose Your Own Adventure concept and combines it with RPG style stats and background. In this particular subtype of game book, you get to roll for stats at the beginning of the story. Sometimes you get to pick race and class, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you get to pick background. It just sort of depends from series to series. As the story progresses, you'll get into encounters, and those stats will affect how the encounter goes down. You'll also get to make choices, and that will affect your stats, or you may get barred from making certain choices based on what your stats already are. A similar, but maybe less complicated digital version of this are choice of games. In choice of games books, you aren't necessarily picking stats right from the start, but the choices you make as you progress through the story affect your personality stats on the back end. And as those stats change, the options available to you for choices change, or certain outcomes of the narrative change. In both these styles of interactive fiction, the choices you make are a little more aggregate, and there are certain things you don't have control over because of choices you've already made. And in the case of choice of games, where you can literally use their scripting language to change a single line based on a variable, you may even have very, very tiny narrative changes based on previous decisions. So how does reading this kind of interactive fiction benefit us as linear fiction writers? Both these styles of interactive fiction are wonderful experiments in how, as a character changes, the story may change, and how it's rarely a single choice that may change the narrative of an outcome, but rather a series of complex choices that bring a character to a certain state. It's also an interesting interplay between a character's active choice and the things that occur because a character is who they are. Maybe they want to save that lizard man. Guess what? They can't. They aren't strong enough. So it's a great way to explore how those two aspects of character work together to push a narrative forward. I said that this week I would talk about text adventure games, and so that's what we're going to do, and we're going to go to the computer for it. This is a browser emulation of the famous text adventure game Zork, and I wish I could find a better way to do this. So you can see that the game begins west of house. We are standing west of a house. You are standing in an open field west of a white house with a boarded front door. There is a small mailbox here. What I can do in the grand tradition of text adventures is go mailbox. Only also in the grand tradition of text adventures, I picked the wrong verb. So I'm going to do open mailbox. Reveals a leaflet. Cool, I'm going to read a leaflet instead. This tells me about the game Zork. It's kind of a joke. Anyway, but what we're going to do, we're going to go up, we're going to look here and say, oh, you are standing in open field west of a white house. All right, so if I'm west of a white house, that means the house is east of me, so I'm going to go east. The door's boarded up and I can't remove the boards. Cool. So what I'm going to do is instead explore around the area. I'm going to go north. To the north, a narrow path winds through the trees. Hell yeah, let's go north. Forest path. This is a path winding through a dimly lit forest. The path heads north-south here. One particularly large tree with some low branches stands at the edge of the path. I'm going to keep going north. I can just press in to go north. You're in a clearing with a forest surrounding you on all sides. A path leads south. On the ground is a pile of leaves. I'm going to take leaves. In disturbing the pile of leaves, a grating is revealed. I have taken it. So what's a quality that text adventures demonstrate or exemplify that we could kind of pick up and use? One is a sense of spatial awareness. In order to be able to guide a player through an area, the writer of the text adventure has to have a good mental map where everything is in the immediate area. If a house is to the east, that house needs to stay to the east, or the player is not going to be able to proceed through the game. On that same note, that immediate setting is the primary storytelling mechanic. What things are in the setting that the player can explore, and how do they move the story forward? Some later text adventure games and some modern text adventure games maybe get a little more flowery in their language, but they still need to provide concrete details that a player can latch onto. So there's a distinct sense of brevity and concreteness to the environment in which the player is existing. So even if as a writer you never go into full detail about how a room is laid out or how a house or a castle is laid out, at least if you know in your head how things are laid out in a very objective way, it makes moving a character through that space feel a little more authentic. Last week I said I'd teach you how to build a branching narrative. Today we're going to try that using sticky notes. So we're setting up the outline for our interactive fiction piece, okay? Our branching narrative. So we're starting at the start. But we also want to set up what we want our endings to be. This is a crisis, climax, resolution. It's the end of a 7-point plot. Okay, our hero can become the villain. Our hero remains a hero but stays alive. Or our hero dies. Now, the reason you want to set up an ending point, because you're trying to get from here to here, you need to figure out how you're going to shoot for here. Can you theoretically discovery write a branching narrative? Sure. But if you don't have an idea of at least where you're going, you're not going to have a good time. Because the cause and effect relationship in a branching narrative is so important, not knowing what your final effect is makes it really hard to lay out those causes. Okay, let's say we're doing a basic 7-point plot. Okay, so we might get through hook, inciting incident, plot 1, pinch 1. And that may all be the same. This is just kind of setting up the story, setting up the major conflicts. The midpoint may very well be where shit gets real. It really depends. Oh no. Now, does a split have to happen in the midpoint? No, of course not. But let's say our character is faced with something so dramatic that the choice she makes in that moment could lead her down a villainous path. So at that point, our story begins to split. We end up with 2 different pinch points. A pinch point that will eventually lead to the villainous path, and a pinch point that will eventually lead to the hero side. So maybe in the villain path, that's just how it's going to go. She ends up just finishing out the story and is a villain. The story progresses. Oh no, dear God, look what's happened. But let's say something else happens in the hero path. She has the opportunity to make a grave mistake, one that could lead to her death. That might reveal itself in our second plot point. Now, the beauty of branching narrative is this could all happen anywhere. You could keep a single path all the way down to the crisis of the story. All the choices that she makes this entire time could be cumulative. So it's not one choice in the midpoint, but rather accumulation of all her choices where it turns out she's just evil by nature, sort of Paragon versus Renegade, and that makes her evil, and that makes her a hero, and then it's a single choice here that kills her or keeps her alive. The idea, however, is to always keep in mind cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. I want this effect, what would cause it?